Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
The core of MASH was Gary Burghoff, who his kind voice, his charming smile, and that renowned teddy bear on his side at all times. He was loved by viewers, and many thought everyone on the set had the same sentiment. However, beneath those happy scenes was a tension-filled, secret narrative and subdued animosity from someone who couldn't stand him at all. Additionally, he was constantly with this person on set. Do you want to be aware of the specific actor? Come along as we finally reveal the actor who was genuinely hated, even when everyone liked Gary Burghoff. The characters created by Gary Burghoff behind the scene. We occasionally forget that the on-screen actors are not all the same as the roles they portray. It's something that occurs spontaneously when a familiar face appears in our daily lives. Rooms each week, it's simple to believe we understand their true identities. We begin to feel that they closely resemble the roles they make things come to life. However, the reality can be radically different. Additionally, when that fact comes out at last, it may surprise you, a bit upsetting, even. Consider Radar O'Reilly, for instance. He was among the most adored MASH characters. As the 4000 and he brought 477th's company clerk. Something soft and innocent to a scene that was sarcastic in other ways, fatigue and the ominous specters of conflict. The other characters, however, had difficulties formed by fatigue and trauma. Our Radar was notable for his kindness and innocence. He had the impression that required protection from all the brutality all around him. His large eyes, and he was easy to love because of his gentle demeanor. He was the type of person that could bring some brightness into the darkest situations of the performance. Additionally, Gary Burghoff was the man underneath his endearing persona. He performed Radar so flawlessly that a lot of fans believed that he must be equally kind in the actual world. However, when he left the show during the heartwarming two-part something called Goodbye Radar moved behind the scenes. Without him, MASH carried on as if it had done when the other principal actors had previously departed. Additionally, by the time after the show's big finale, Goodbye, Amen, and Goodbye, there was a surge of passion from supporters worldwide. Individuals wished to respect the heritage of the show, honor the memories, and say goodbye. Goodbye. In the interim, an article showed up in TV Guide, authored by one of Bert Perleski, the writers of the show. The article appeared to be sentimental. Goodbye, but inside it was something unanticipated. Perleski talked on how individuals feel about Gary Burghoff on set. Furthermore, it wasn't what fans might have guessed. He claims that although the character, Radar, was beloved by all, their sentiments towards Boff personally weren't as warm. Perleski clarified that nobody wished to discuss the issue in public. But overall sentiment was distributed among the actors. Their soft location for Radar, but collaborating with, but Burghoff was another matter. One and performer who wished to remain anonymous said of Gary that he was challenging to get along with. They stated he pretended that everything was against him. Frequently acting rudely towards others. However, when someone confronted Heimer offered him a preview of his own conduct, he wouldn't be able to handle it. The performer even remembered a humorous but instructive moment. Mike Farrell, an additional celebrity on Gary, was informed by the show that he was adept at being cruel to others, but couldn't tolerate being pushed by others. And Gary, not understanding how his remarks were sarcastic, and he responded that he was fed up with dishing it out. It was a powerful moment, more than he most likely intended. Everything grew increasingly complex when one of the characters consciously shared details about his relationship with Gary off-screen. And nobody anticipated this because Wenley saw their characters on screen without being aware that anything really distressing events occurring behind the scenes. Keep watching to find out. The actual events between these two, the performers who didn't like Gary. In the course of the In MASH's early years, the program appeared to an intimate family. On the screen, it's easy to think that everyone gets along, best companions. However, behind the lens, not everything was as cozy and beautiful as people idea. A member of the original Castamlan Stevenson, one of the members that performed the laid-back and frequently overburdened Colonel Henry Blake, finally turned to goat the series. The majority believed he had left, merely because he was fed up with always either he, character played by Alan Alda, comes in second, the witty and endearing Hawkeye Pierce. However, it turns out that there may have been a more profound cause of his abrupt departure. At one point, Amlon Stevenson talked candidly about those he collaborated with on the program. He revealed that he was friendly with nearly everyone. Indeed, he stated that the entire cast, all but one member, were excellent. The individual who he spent the most time with, this most frequent companion, was, additionally, he didn't always get along with alongside Gary Burghoff. Gary was a radar player, the sweet and naive cashier who was never leaving the Colonel's side. On the show, they appeared to be the ideal pair. One is loyal, the other is giving commands, executing them. However, in reality, it wasn't smooth all the time. Stevenson acknowledged that his connection with Gary was a combination of respect and irritation. Gary was an incredible actor, possibly the greatest of them. However, they occasionally clashed. Occasionally, they simply couldn't agree, and little problems would grow into larger ones. Additionally, Stevenson acknowledged that he wasn't always cooperative either. As his personality developed more popular, his self-assurance began to increase as well. A bit too much, perhaps. He thought that his ego might have made more difficult and that he wasn't totally innocent in their disputes. However, Milan wasn't alone, someone who had a difficult relationship with Gary. Eventually, there were rumors. Gary's set could be challenging, occasionally. There were tales that indicated more than just minor disagreements. In a biography according to reports, Alan Alda in the early 1980s that Milan and Gary used to have a noisy and furious altercation. The story didn't end there. Trapper John was portrayed by Wayne Rogers and was renowned for his cool-headedness. It is said that Nature once became quite irate. He grabbed up a chair with Gary and hurled it in his direction. That depicts a very distinct image from the one fans saw on TV. Despite all of these stressful moments were taking place behind closed doors, it didn't appear to flow over into their performance. Colonel and Radar Blake posted among the most sincere friendships on the program. As soon as Colonel Blake was dropped off the show at the third season's conclusion with his figure who perishes in a terrible aircraft accident, Radar's expression of despair was really actual. That instance crushed the hearts of millions of people, are watching, and it's still there. One of the most poignant TV scenes passed. However, the reality is that the mood on the set wasn't always amiable. Furthermore, who knows, this could be Gary was forced to depart from in Season 7. However, what if it isn't? We will continue to discuss this. For the moment, our attention is still on how Gary's presence mostly led to disputes in the film, and tension. Behind the giggling and the MASH featured its fair share of witty Oni-liners, actual difficulties in life. The performers were human beings with imperfections, feelings, as well as tempers. The connection that admirers observed between Radar and Colonel Blake might have been more powerful when on screen than when off, although it remains a potent representation of two males striving to accomplish their tasks as effectively as possible. They could, in spite of the circumstances, when the filming ceased. Even if MASH appeared to be pure magic on screen while laughing heartily and touching incidents, there were indications that some of the conflicts underlying, the scenes inconspicuously entered, the actual show, particularly in how other Radar played by Gary was treated by characters. Burghoff. If you paid close attention, You'd observe that Radar was frequently regarded as the obnoxious younger sibling that nobody could dispose of. The other members of the team would they make fun of him or roll their eyes. And, although that was all intended to be humorous, I'm curious as to how that made Gary sense. Gary may have felt in real life forgotten. One man in particular had a unique relationship with MASH from the starting. He was the sole actor who played the lead in the first 1970 Robert Altman-directed movie and the version on television that millions of people grew to affection. That ought to have had some significance. He ought to have received a special occasion. However, on the program, his characters were frequently employed in comic relief, about which everyone made jokes, despite the fact that he did his share of much heart and authenticity. As time passed, gradually, other performers began assuming more creative positions. As an example, Alan Aldenot only participated in but also acted in composing and directing episodes. Gary as well desired to demonstrate more of himself at the display. He even penned an episode that centered on Radar in an attempt to shine a bit additional information about the character he'd given so much of himself to it. However, that particular episode did not make it to the screen. Watching must have been painful. Others managed the creative process while his concepts were silently dismissed. It could have given him the impression that he wasn't just as crucial as the other members of the team, as though his voice didn't have the same resonance weight. Now, aside from the problems related to, let's examine Gary's role in the story. Several scandals, disputes, and drama that threatened to harm MASH Robert Altman's MASH discovery. For many years, director Robert Altman remained silent about his true feelings regarding MASH. However, when he ultimately made a decision to express his opinions, it wasn't merely a murmur. The sound resembled a thunderclap. During his film's DVD commentary, Altman remained relatively composed for more than an hour. The tone was calm, easygoing, almost drowsy, actually. However, then he was triggered by something in the situation. Immediately after Gary Burghoff appeared on kneeling at a Radar screen character's fictitious funeral, Altman unexpectedly broke his silence in a manner that none could anticipated. After years of repressed feelings, he confessed how much he detested the MASH television shows. It has nothing to do with either the popularity or the acting. It was anything far more profound for him. He sensed the original was betrayed during the entire show. He had poured his message into his film. He said the film was a daring try to raise awareness of a genuine war. Whatever was taking place at that moment, one that included U.S. combat in Ethiopia, a distant Asian nation. It was serious. It had a purpose and significance. However, to Altman, the subsequent series appeared to take the opposite action. It changed what he perceived as a potent anti-war statement into a weekly comic routine that lasted for 12 years in a row. He refused to believe in the notion that the program was providing little moral teachings. He thought that, regardless of how carefully the scripts are written stated to be, the more important message was detrimental. According to him, it depicted persons of color, particularly Asians, as the adversary repeatedly. Additionally, that, to him, it wasn't just incorrect, it was racist. He didn't mince words. He dialed, it was what he thought it was, claiming that the program sent out the precise opposite of his film's message. For him, not only did the series miss the mark, things turned things all around. Altman was clearly annoyed that so many people didn't even recall his film. He made a joke that most people would say if you ask them about, they'd probably claim it's Alan "Mash" Albert's show. Failing to receive the actor's name is correct. That he believed was evidence that the program had eclipsed the original movie in a manner that eliminated its significance. Furthermore, this wasn't just an casual remark tucked up in the midst of a boring interview. It happened while watching a DVD commentary, a location where filmmakers usually only provide humorous trivia. However, Altman's remarks originated from the heart. It was evident that these emotions had spent a lot of time with him. What? The fact that it was even more intense if Almond's own life had not been simple time spent producing the first location. Documentaries claim that even actors are included on the DVD set. Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland once attempted to fire him from the undertaking. They believed he was also peculiar, or even little insane. However, in spite of all, Altman adhered to his vision. He struggled to tell a tale. That was important to him. Paradoxically, the DVD that included his raw commentary also featured a number of historical television documentaries and specials, which mostly recited the same tales. Repeatedly, after some time, everything began to feel repetitive. Yes, it's interesting, but nothing new. Nevertheless, Altman's spontaneous outburst appeared like a bolt of lightning in a July sky. Everyone was reminded, hearing that behind-the-scenes footage of among the most cherished masterpieces, there may profound conflicts and unsaid frustrations. However, it didn't stop there, with this specific one. It went all the way to more. Thus, keep checking back for the most contentious section, rejected episodes as well as scripts. Although the network occasionally requested modifications to the MASH scripts, there was a specific instance in which they just wouldn't let it. It wasn't only regarding changing a few lines or the atmosphere. It was a resounding nay. Additionally, when you are aware of the background of the demonstrate, the cause becomes more intriguing. MASH started out as a picture, a daring and darkly comical film. Robert Altman was the director. It informed the account of Korean War Army physicians, war in its unadulterated, unrefined form and unreservedly truthful. The film featured profanity, aggression, and grave grown-up subjects, which television couldn't handle completely in the early 1970s. Thus, when it was transformed into a TV series, many things needed to alter. However, MASH retained its voice. Indeed, even with all of prime time's constraints, TV pushed the boundaries in ways that OWN anticipated. One moment that will never be forgotten arrived when Henry, the adored character, Blake, was out. At the time, almost never did television do that, and key characters simply didn't finish like that. However, MASH left after taking that chance. Watchers, in disbelief, demonstrating that it wasn't excitant to face genuine feelings. And that wasn't the end of it. The performance started, taking out the standard laugh track, particularly during major surgery scenes. They later dropped it entirely in certain episodes. A small adjustment made MASH feel more genuine and human. It provided access to talking about subjects that TV series had long steered clear, such as stress, trauma, and the emotional burden that soldiers bore alongside them. Other comedies, however, adhered to. MASH ventured to venture into safe storylines. Deeper, illuminating the objects folks often disregarded. However, despite everything among this artistic liberty, there were continues to fight behind the scenes. The individuals in charge of it frequently fought with the network CBS, which broadcast it. The tone caused them to differ. The show's themes and potential proceed. In spite of the disputes, the majority of the moment they managed to moving forward collectively. But there was one episode that CBS declined to accept regardless of what? Hawkeye was the name of the double, and it was meant to be a component of the initial season. The narrative focused on the Hawkeye Pierce as portrayed by Alan Alda. Throughout the script, Hawkeye is covertly dating two nurses concurrently, neither of them being aware of the other, but once the women learn after being played, they both choose to make it even. Together, they inform him that both of them are expecting his child. The purpose of the show was to be humorous with the final lesson, but CBS believed the content was too dangerous for television. The moment. They were concerned about the notion of phony pregnancies combined with references to intimacy and deceit would be too contentious for the audience. Thus, the script was never broadcast. However, that wasn't the story's conclusion. Although it never aired, viewers finally received the opportunity to witness it. The script that was not broadcast was included as an additional feature years later in Martini's and Medicine's MASH DVD box set for collection. For a long time, fans and interested onlookers, it was an opportunity to see behind the scenes and view the episode that was excessively audacious even, for a show that is renowned for taking risks. This instance in MASH history serves as a reminder to the extent to which the show was prepared to go to be truthful, sentimental, and occasionally unsettling tales. Despite the fact that the network resisted, the authors and MASH's designers continued to look for methods to push the boundaries of television. And by doing this, they did more than just produce amusement. They contributed to changing what TV might be. In the book, MASH Watching, the man who watches America, Larry Gelbart, who contributed to MASH, thought carefully on his personal interpretation of the series. For it was never only about jokes with him and peculiar individuals. It was about demonstrating the brutal reality of combat, exposing how unpleasant and useless it can be. Remarkably, CBS never experienced any issues, given the show's vehement anti-war stance. But what they found difficult was the difference between MASH and other comedies. The program didn't always adhere to the standard formula. At times it was solemn, silent, and uncooked. That strange tone caused the network discomfort. The book also discussed regarding a different plot thread that the authors had intended to, but never did. Display. In that rendition, the medical professionals and nurses were stranded outdoors, in Thesi, Chile, and they began covertly wishing to become enough ill to be sent home. It wasn't a fabrication. Actual, in difficult circumstances, troops have felt in that manner. Despite the fact that it reflected the truth, CBS requested that they take down the narrative. They believed it made the characters appear disloyal, and the network wished to avoid being perceived as not American. Gelbart went on to explain this back and forth as a kind of game with CBS. It was annoying at times, but it also turned into a step in the creative process. Despite all of these obstacles, he acknowledged that most when the network provided them with the room to produce the presentation in the manner that they